CFL 110, your weekly trip around the biggest stories in the Canadian Football League with Jeff Hamilton and Andrew Hustler Patterson.
What is up, CFL fans? Welcome to CFL 110. Andrew Patterson, soon to be joined by my pal Jeff Hamilton of the Winnipeg Free Press. And man, we've got so much to talk about today. Coming out of truly one of the greatest weekends of regular season action I can ever remember in the CFL. 4 absolute classics, a couple shootouts, and every single one of the games last week in the 3-down nation going down to the wire. Very interesting landscape in both divisions right now, setting up some big games this week. We will hit the lines and make our picks for the upcoming week with the lines over at Coolbet Canada, but not before we dig out from just 4 absolutely phenomenal games. Of course, huge thanks to our partners at Coolbet, who will be sponsoring CFL 110, and of course, so much else that we do on the Winnipeg Sports Talk Network. If you're with us on YouTube, hit that thumbs up. Make sure to give us a sub, and you can also join us 1 p.m. Central each and every day for more CFL talk and more on Winnipeg Sports Talk. But without further ado, let's welcome in my tag team partner, Jeff Hamilton. And Hammer, what? We've been saying this for the last 2 or 3 days, but what a weekend in the Canadian Football League. That was absolutely phenomenal stuff.
Hey, Huss, I know there's, added, what do you want to call it, consciousness with the air quality going around right now with wildfires, but each one of those games required, I would argue, a cigarette after. That was quite the weekend of football, quite the weekend of back and forth. I imagine the bettors out there, especially the diehards, I would love to see a heart rate monitor on them for this weekend, because when you thought it was in the bag, it was anything but. It's typical, right? Crazy comebacks are typical. There's been lots of talk about the last 3 minutes of the game and how it's impossible to drain the clock and all those things, and it creates miraculous comebacks. We usually get, maybe 1-2 of those a weekend to get them pretty much in every single game here, and to have the kind of lead changes. Thursday's game alone, 10 lead changes, and what ended up in being an overtime game, you thought that wouldn't be topped. Well, it seemed like each game that passed just tried to do its best, and what a weekend it was to watch this great game, this great league.
Yeah, listen, there's been a lot of interesting conversations around the league and social media this year about ways that the CFL could continue to move forward and improve themselves, and I'm here for all the conversations. I am personally not one that wants to touch what's happening in the final 3 minutes, and I think last weekend is a perfect example of it. And we'll get to the Bombers. You want to drain the clock? Get a few first downs. That'll be a big topic when we talk about the Winnipeg-Calgary game. But as you mentioned, let's start right off with Thursday's game between BC and Hamilton. And it just speaks to the action that we had in the league last week. Coming out of that game, I thought that we'd be talking about that for game of the year. And to be honest with you, after the other 3 games, it was just one of the 4 incredible matchups we had in the CFL. But this was a big boy game. The Hamilton Tiger Cats hosting the British Columbia Lions. Ticats were on a bit of a short week, and that's why we had jumped on BC +3. But holy smokes, just from quarterback play alone, Bo Levi Mitchell, Nathan Rourke, what they did in the second half was phenomenal. But I do think Hamilton had a bit of a lethargic start, despite, and by the way, shout out to the fans of the Hamilton Tiger Cats for supporting their team the way they did. Obviously, great night with Shea Gilgeous-Alexander in the park, and I will give Luke Wilson a little bit of credit too. That rivalry between he and the Hamilton fans, I think, spurred them to make sure they stepped up and showed out, and they did. But the guy that ended up really being the star of the show and showing out was Nathan Rourke, who went for over 408 yards and led his team to an incredibly important win to get them to 4-5. Really, it was an incredibly well-played game until Tim White went into a bit of hero ball mode in OT, which ended up costing Hamilton the game. But listen, this was a perfect example of how great the CFL can be when played at its high level. I believe BC had no penalties in the game, which is something you don't see very often. Hamilton's still in a very good position in the East, but a win that could very well be a trigger point for a resurgence of the BC Lions under head coach Buck Pierce. thoughts on the redemption of Nathan Rourke and the BC Lions to kick off last week.
Yeah, for a game which you almost touched on there, Huss. Almost a game that had a ton of everything, right? And to focus on a guy like Nathan Rourke, I think, is the biggest takeaway. I mean, it was whether you want to call it a vintage performance, but it was one of those performances that harkened back to 2022. And we always keep talking about his 2022 season because it was so it was such a fantastic year for him despite being injured. But he's put together those kind of performance, and it's not just the yards, it's not just the stats, it's the confidence, right? It's the courage, it's the tenacity that we saw him play in 2022 that really came through in this game for me. And as you mentioned, I mean, this was a topsy-turvy type of game. I mean, the Hamilton Tiger Cats had 60 net offensive yards for the first 2 quarters. And so you had BC feeling pretty good about themselves. And then you had what has been a pattern for this Ticats team to claw their way back in the second half. And I think that's ultimately what happened here, Huss, as you alluded to. Tim White dropping the ball and fumbling the ball in overtime and ultimately sealing the deal for the Lions was, you know, they had 3 straight touchdowns in that third quarter, right, to claw themselves back. They took the lead, they had opportunities. And so to see Nathan Rourke do what he did late in the game, that's not just gotta be, that's a ton of confidence for Rourke himself. But the BC Lions overall, 4-5, well, not a sexy record by any stretch of the imagination, particularly when you're in the West Division, is a hell of a lot better than what it would have been with the loss. So, you know, in this situation, you saw it after the game. You saw it in the locker room videos. Buck Pierce leaned into this win for his team. This is a game of inches. You lose that game, and that talk is very much different. So you know they're feeling this one. They're feeling good about it. And as you mentioned, I mean, the Hamilton Tiger Cats, they take a step back. It was a short week. That's why we were both on the BC Lions to, you know, for the spread to win that game even. I just think it was they kind of came up short, even though they had a lot of opportunity to get things done. And there was missed opportunities. There was the fumble. There was a couple missed field goals. Hamilton's still in a good spot, but here we see the BC Lions climbing their way back into the conversation and to put the pressure on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, who we'll talk in a bit here, haven't been doing that much. So the West is even more interesting after that game.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, listen, a couple things just before we move on. Listen, Bo Levi Mitchell was phenomenal in the second half. Nathan Rourke, as I mentioned, went over for 400 yards. We actually, every now and then, I'll lean on the fellows over at CoolBet for a unique prop for the game. And we were going for the 700 club in that one, a total of 700 yards passing. Well, the fireworks that were promised were delivered. It was actually $6.99 at the end of regulation.
Yeah.
Shout out to OT. But lost in all of that, I think, is James Butler's performance, both from a passing standpoint, but also running on the ground. When you get that balanced offense, it makes it that much harder to stop. And I think we really saw the results of that late in the fourth quarter when BC was able to get the job done.
Absolutely. And that's Buck Pierce's fingerprints all over this offense, right? That was the knock against Jordan Maksimic before that he was just relying too much on the passing game and wasn't incorporating the run attack. And as we know, Buck Pierce here in Winnipeg, often to some of the players on offense displeasure, loved the complementary game, loved to run the rock. So to see Nathan Rourke performing the way he is, to have James Butler be a great compliment, you got to look at that success for Nathan Rourke and then look at the contributions for Butler. And that isn't a coincidence. When you establish the run game, your passing attack opens up. And when that passing attack opens up, even the most modest of quarterbacks can take advantage, as we've seen this year. When you're a guy like Nathan Rourke, you're stealing other teams' lunch money.
Now, we're going to see BC and Montreal play in the finale this week, and we'll get to that one when we do our picks a little bit later on. But moving on to the Montreal Alouettes, we had the continued story of the QB carousel that's all come out of that Davis Alexander re-aggravation of his injury at the end of that thrilling comeback a few weeks ago against the Toronto Argonauts. MBT started. Listen, this was the ultimate revenge game. We joked between the two quarterbacks. Cody Fajardo and MBT traded for each other, add in Julian Grant and Hollins on the other side of former teams. And there was a lot of juicy storylines, but this was going as to plan. I think through the first little while, Montreal had a nice lead. Everyone knew that Montreal had the record. Edmonton was kind of lost at that point. And to me, that entire game changed on a terrible decision, a pick six late in the first half, which turned what would have been, assuming that Montreal got a field goal, a 16-4 halftime lead into a 13-11 lead, and it was game on. And in the second half, it was Cody Fajardo, who so we'll get into a little bit more on Cody Fajardo for a minute, but playing a little bit of hero ball himself. Absolutely zero, literally zero help from the running game, and he found a way to get a win. Massive for Edmonton as they look to get closer to respectability, and big questions about the Montreal quarterback room and who will even be the starter as they await Davis Alexander's return.
Yeah, you're going to have to bear with me here because I have two big issues with this. One starts with Jason Maas, okay? I mean, we talked about this weeks ago, how dumb it was to play Davis Alexander in that game against the struggling Toronto Argonauts, still struggling Toronto Argonauts, and because it was very clear he wasn't ready to go after he started that game. He was laboring, we've talked about this a ton. He was laboring coming out, in his runs coming out of the pocket. And ultimately, it just felt like a matter of time before he was going to re-injure himself. And sure enough, he did just that late in the game in what was a heroic TD run by the quarterback, right? I mean, it was great. You saw Jason Maas get emotional after the game. And I think that was my tell. He knew he had done wrong, right? He knew he'd made the wrong decision, and it cost his player who is a rising, I don't like using the word stars in these situations, but Davis Alexander is a bit of a rising star, right? He tied the record for the best winning streak to start a career, right? Like, I mean, that tied him, I believe. Now he's out for 6 weeks. He's still going to be out for another couple more if he keeps that whole stint on the 6. And Montreal was in a good position back then. They were a couple games above 500. They could have sat him out another week, and yet Jason Maas played him. And that kind of turns into my next thing, right? It results in McLeod Bethel-Thompson playing. And the circus that McLeod Bethel-Thompson has managed to create around him for a backup quarterback is hilarious. It's like this guy just can't get enough of the attention. Like, I love some of the things he says in the past. I love how he's called out the league. He's done a great job with the previous commissioner and Randy Ambrosie, right? I love when he uses his platform to do it. But when you're just like a scrappy backup now and you think you're an NFL starter, like, it just comes across like you're, like what you're saying is dumb. Like, he had one good game. He takes a shot at the CFL on TSN panel for like, don't say good things to me, and then lays a couple eggs the next, is in his next performances. And in this one was the ultimate, right? The pick six at half. Like, what was that? Like, you're not even sure. And I think you have to put it on the quarterback because the Alouettes had a fairly it's not a healthy CFL lead, but at least a lead nonetheless. And then he gets the pick six. Like, you're not getting pulled if that's the receiver's fault, right? Like, you're getting pulled because your team just, your coach is fed up, doesn't want to be, have this be a part. And everyone's wondering, like, why this guy is not performing. To me, and this is pure speculation, and it's probably pretty disrespectful to a degree, Huss, but this guy got paid the most amount of money for all the backup quarterbacks. It was something on, in and around $180,000 of hard money and then incentives when he got a chance to play. And these are the performances he's putting on. To me, it was very clear. Hard feelings in the offseason, right? He got traded, as you mentioned, the ultimate revenge game. So these two teams swapped their starting quarterbacks, and they both turned into backups overnight, right? But the situation that McLeod Bethel-Thompson was going into was one that he was never going to supplant the number one quarterback without an injury. And I think when you think about a 26-year-old, a guy who doesn't really have a history, when you think about getting up at 6 a.m. those days, Huss, and pushing through to be a starter, I think those were non-existent. It's exactly why you saw such pedestrian play from McLeod Bethel-Thompson, who's giving Montreal absolutely zero chance to win, to the point where it's now Caleb Evans who's taking over. I'll pass the mic to you, Huss, to get off this rant here. But it's a mind-boggling decision from Jason Maas. And this is the bed he and his team now have to sleep in as they await for their only reliable quarterback to come back from what was a preventable injury, in my opinion.
I'll say this about MBT. We all remember him, as you alluded to, kind of calling out the TSN panel and saying, "Oh, don't say anything good now." Well, he really played to the bit because 30 seconds before they went to halftime on Friday Night Football with the entire crew there, he served up that meatball that completely flipped the game and ended up being the catalyst to a huge win for Edmonton. Now, that got them back into the game, but as we move over to the Elks side of things, a couple things. I mean, we'll focus on Cody Fajardo, who was the star of the show. But we talk about a revenge game. There was also a level of redemption. And for Julian Grant to catch the last second touchdown for the win after being the GOAT the week before and dropping a beautiful pass from Cody Fajardo that would have likely led to a victory over the Hamilton Tiger Cats was why we watch sports and why you always want to come back for another opportunity to do it. So credit to Julian Grant for not dropping it and helping his team win the football game. But this was the Cody Fajardo show in the second half. And listen, for folks that are unaware, we're in Winnipeg. I'm a big Bomber guy. You've, of course, covered the team, so don't as much have a team. But, I mean, listen, we remember the great rivalry, and which is still on, between the Bombers and the Riders. And Cody Fajardo was a central figure in all of that. So for a Rider quarterback to then go to Montreal, stick the dagger in the Grey Cup into the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, you would think this guy would be public enemy number one to anybody that bleeds blue and gold. I can't help but love the guy. And I mean, you watched that performance last night, and in a lot of ways, it is what the Canadian Football League is all about. Second chances, opportunities to take your team from the downs to some real highs. And man, there's no team that needs that more than the Edmonton Elks. And the Cody Fajardo story and what he authored along with his teammates on Friday night was hopefully signs of some more competitive football from Edmonton to come. But on one night, he was the star. The smile was back, and it was great for fans in Edmonton and really just CFL fans in general.
Just to quickly comment on the Keon Julian Grant redemption and ultimately the Cody Fajardo redemption, if you will, right? Because while I think things were okay in Montreal, like I think the hard feelings are really on one side, right? Montreal did a lot for Cody. They reestablished him in the CFL, and they essentially extended his career probably a couple more years even from this season. He's doing that right now as well. But on that Keon Julian Grant, there's a really what I thought was a really, warm moment, if you will, after the game. Like they embraced and they hugged, and you could feel it from both sides, right? Because you have one guy who kind of feels like he's had to prove himself his whole career in Cody Fajardo, who just earlier this year, right? It was last show maybe? It was against Hamilton where Bo Levi Mitchell called him, probably the most disrespected quarterback in recent years, right? A guy who's won a Grey Cup championship. But Keon Julian Grant would have been wearing it, as you mentioned, that title, right? The ball dropper, right? And to come back and have redeem yourself in that way, it erases that narrative. No one's talking about that anymore, right? Like you backed it up. But on to Cody Fajardo, I mean, this guy, as you mentioned, I mean, I've covered this league for 10 years. I've traveled for 10 years. I've been to Regina more times than I would like to admit. And, I've been in and on I've met Cody and have seen, the way he acts and whatever. And in Saskatchewan, he was just whiny, right? It was just like by the end of it, he had bought, he had done the what would you classify it as? He had done himself a disservice by buying into his own hype, right? He had bought into this whole pressure of being in Saskatchewan and being the Rough Riders quarterback and, all this stuff. And, he had that great season in 2019 that was very typical to this year where he had a bunch of quarterbacks go down. And so he was recognized as the West representee of the, MOP, right? He ended up losing to Speedy Banks. So he had a little bit of cockiness. And as his career continued on there, it was just whiny stuff, whether it was like the social media stuff or whether it was, that one season that ultimately led to him leaving Saskatchewan. He was talking to media as if the season was over and there were still a couple games left and they were still in the playoff hunt. Like that was the unlikable Cody. Then he goes to Montreal. He silences all his critics, including you and I, and he shoves it down our throats with a championship in a heroic effort that involved him putting on a clinic to win it in the final drive, right? And then he became a little bit like, okay, we're buying into this guy. Because even leading up to that Grey Cup week, you're sitting here and being like, who does Cody Fajardo think he is? Like this is just, it's almost biblical in some ways. And then, obviously that season for Montreal was just incredible in and of itself. But again, now you see it here. Like I mentioned earlier, like I don't think yes, it's tough to leave a team, but you were there for years. You got to be the guy again. You won a championship. But I love how personally Cody Fajardo takes things. Like, I love it. And I love how personally he was taking things this season when they were coming close in games and saying stuff like that's loser talk, essentially, right? So, it is an interesting thing. We did talk about this last week about, hindsight's obviously 2020, but you have to think about what it would look like in Edmonton had Cody Fajardo been the starter at the beginning of the year and at 2-6 and in a very competitive West division where you have to catch up to Winnipeg and BC, and that doesn't even count for Calgary and Saskatchewan who have a massive lead. I think it's too little too late, but it is a nice touch. I don't know what that means for fans, Haas, but I guess it's kind of cool that Cody's a likable guy and the Elks are doing better. Anything else to take away from it?
You know what? I can tell you this. I mean, talking with their pal Dustin Nielsen and friends over at Edmonton Sports Talk, they had their big nasty bash that night, and they were out at the rugby club, and they had the Elks game on, and from talking to them afterwards, they said that was maybe the best Elks moment. Now, again, the bar is very low that they've had in the last 5 or 6 years, and there was some legitimate excitement. And I will say this, the beauty of doing these shows where you can go back and watch them, I will Barry Horowitz myself for a moment. I have been on the right side of this Trey Ford conversation. If they had gone to Cody a little earlier in this season, or maybe played the guy that was better in training camp right out of the gate, I don't think Edmonton would be in the situation that they're in right now. I'll tell you what, the Ottawa Redblacks are quickly changing their situation with these last couple of wins, and holy smokes, did they have a classic on Saturday. Down 22-1 to the Toronto Argonauts on the road in the first half. Dru Brown rallies the troops and goes to the air all day long for an incredible comeback win, 46-42, in a huge, highly leveraged game against the Toronto Argonauts. He goes for 370 plus, 5 touchdowns, no picks. And the Ottawa Redblacks, Jeff, have all of a sudden won 2 wins in a row, and dare I say, are feeling it coming into Winnipeg for this game on Thursday night. There's 2 sides to the story. Incredible comeback by Ottawa and brilliant play by their quarterback. Ryan Dinwiddie's got to be wondering what the hell is going on with his team, his defense. And as we heard after the game, it was Dinwiddie saying that he doesn't have the dogs in the dressing room that he's had before in leading his team to a couple recent championships. This was a wild one. And to think that the Bombers blew a 17-0 lead and that wasn't the biggest comeback of the day in the CFL tells you all you need to know about how wild this one was between the Argos and the Redblacks.
Yeah, I think it was the 3rd largest deficit that the team's come back in franchise history. So obviously that right there tells you just how significant the hole was that they put themselves in and what a hole they did. I mean, at that point in time when Jordan Williams scooped up that ball and returned it all the way, you thought this game was going to be
time to go do those Saturday afternoon errands before you got ready for the Bomber game.
But those live bettors that understand the ice that goes through the veins of Dru Brown would have jumped on the 21.5, the 20.5 point spread, the 18.5 point spread, the 17.5 point spread, possibly even the 14.5 point spread that was continuing to be offered for the Ottawa Redblacks, who ultimately won that game. It's just us. Everything felt so difficult, as smooth as 373 passing yards and a career high 5 touchdowns sounds for Dru Brown. It wasn't easy. It was just it required it required every bit of that, right? And there was some sloppy plays in there. There was some mistakes in there that led to that deficit. So I'm not, I think for this game for the Ottawa Redblacks, it was just another one of those thank God we get to keep our jobs another week, right? To me, it was Bobby Dice being able to take, just take another exhale after that game. They're not in a good situation here, Huss, right? They're 3-6. They're not in a good spot. They're still very much in a hole here.
Feels pretty good when you were 1-6, though.
For sure, yeah, for sure. But this is the thing. I don't see this as momentum building. To me, it was. It's 2. Yes, it was a very important 2 wins. I mean, this was a team that was staring down, being out of the playoffs if they didn't turn a corner here. But at the same time, the 2 victories aren't convincing to me. The first one, of course, against Calgary came with PJ Walker as their quarterback for Calgary, right? And the win before that was against Calgary in conditions where it was fall-like weather, October-like weather in Winnipeg in June or July or whatever the game was. And then this game, it took everything against what is a bad Toronto Argonauts team, right? Like, Toronto is not a good team. So I don't, as well as, like you'll take any win, right? That's the commonality.
They're not looking for style points.
No,
although they
not,
did get some from their quarterback.
Absolutely. But it's just, I don't see them coming into Winnipeg as this team that's like on a hot streak, or this team that's, the Bombers need to be worried about. They need to respect everybody in this league. But I'm not buying into the hype. And going over to Toronto, Huss, and I'm going to put this over to you, but Ryan Dinwiddie did not spare anyone, man. It started with as you mentioned, no dogs in this room, right? We don't have enough dogs here, which to me was a shot to the management. We didn't bring the right players in, right? We all know the offseason that Toronto had. They took their Grey Cup winning team, and yes, you're going to lose some players every time you win a Grey Cup, even get to a Grey Cup. We've seen that in Winnipeg over the last couple seasons, to be sure. But they never replaced them with any great players. They just relied on, this philosophy over there that you can bring in an American, and he can, with the right coaching, he can flash. And we've seen that in Toronto for years. We're not seeing that anymore. So it was a shot at the management. He was asked about the O-line, a group who has struggled this year, but had a pretty good game against the Redblacks. Didn't surrender one single quarterback sack on Nick Arbuckle. And so, he said that he went as far and said that he was not even sure he'd put Chad Kelly in front of that O-line. He called out special teams coach Mickey Donovan for their sloppy play, and then put the spotlight back on the players. So, like, to me, this worked in week 3 when he unleashed after that loss to Saskatchewan. They got a victory the next week. Do you see, where do you see the Toronto Argonauts now, where they're at in the East, what their record is? And what do you think was Ryan Dinwiddie's point? Was he trying to light a fire, or was he doing it for himself and just trying to vent?
Well, I think there's probably a little bit of both. I mean, listen, Dinwiddie, we've seen this year on a couple of occasions, can get very emotional after bad losses. And make no mistake about it, that one was about as bad as it gets. I mean, you're at home. This is a game you have to have. You're up 21, and a 2-win team comes back and boat races you in the second half, and you end up losing by 4 in front of your home fans, to really, in all likelihood, make it nearly impossible to come out of this hole. The one thing I'll say about Dinwiddie is that, I mean, listen, the guys won a couple of Grey Cups recently. They have consistently found ways to turn the roster over, put athletes into positions to succeed, and I think he is looking at, maybe it just doesn't happen automatically every time, and there is some frustration on that as well. But bottom line was, they had to have this game, and they failed in a number of areas. And listen, I'm not going to hang this one on Nick Arbuckle, and I'm with you. I thought the offensive line played at a pretty good level. So moving forward, huge questions about Toronto, and I think at this point, without Chad Kelly seemingly imminent to come back, I think this might just be on to next year for the Toronto Argonauts, although they're going to have a lot of games to play. The one thing, as we move over to the Bombers, I will disagree with you on, is that I actually do think the Ottawa Redblacks, particularly offensively, have a ton of momentum coming into Winnipeg. And considering what we saw in the game against Calgary, I think that scares the hell out of Winnipeg Blue Bomber fans. Jeff, the Bombers had the dream start in a game that they had to have against Calgary. They were up 17-0. Calgary hadn't even gotten a first down. Vernon Adams just says, screw it, throws deep. They get a 70-plus yard touchdown that really seemed to turn the game around. And then it seemed like a slow drip the rest of the way as the Bombers' offense completely stalled. Vernon Adams got going and then started to expose a decimated Blue Bomber secondary that is even more in trouble heading into the Ottawa game now that Terrell Bonds is out for the season. The two starting corners for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers this year, where they were already question marks, are now gone. And they got to find a way to stop Dru Brown coming up. But as far as this game goes, there's a ton of talk about the secondary, and we really dove into that on Winnipeg Sports Talk with Josh Frey-Sam, your colleague, afterwards. To me, you look back at, Winnipeg Blue Bomber teams in tight games in the fourth quarter they get first downs. They find a way. I mean, we're not talking about them needing a touchdown. They needed a couple more first downs to milk the clock and kick a walk-off game winner. Well, they weren't able to do that. Sergio Castillo had the heroics. They rolled him out and he kicked a record-tying 63-yard field goal in the final minute to put the Bombers up. But I think everybody watching that game knew that this is the CFL. There is way too much time left. And sure enough, Paradis hits the walk-off winner and Calgary wins by 1. This was the game that if the Bombers won, they would have been ahead of Calgary in the standings, in second, looking up at the Saskatchewan Roughriders. The result of the loss, Jeff, puts a big gap between Calgary and Sask at the top of the West to Winnipeg and BC. BC wins. The Bombers are now just a half game up with the teeth of their schedule coming up right now. It felt like a devastating loss and huge questions on a short week before the Bombers go in and host the Ottawa Redblacks on Thursday. We'll get to that game in a minute, but just thoughts on what happened with the Bombers and where they go from here, considering the huge question marks and issues on both sides of the football.
Yeah, you mentioned colleague Josh Frey-Sam at the Free Press with me. I'm gonna reference another colleague in Taylor Allen, who opened his story in this morning's paper in the Winnipeg Free Press of who had the Winnipeg Blue Bombers getting swept in their 3-game season series with the Calgary Stampeders on their 2025 bingo card.
That'd be no one.
Nobody. Everybody had the Calgary Stampeders after what was a just disastrous 2024 season and even 2023 season. Being where they are, right? But here we are with the Calgary Stampeders, as you mentioned. What a critical game, right? 6-3 for Calgary now, 5-4 for Winnipeg. When you would look at 6-4 and 5-4, I was like, that hurts, right? And now you're now in a hole. You're back to 500. Calgary has some breathing room in second, and certainly you're got a lot of work to do to catch up to the 7-1 Saskatchewan Roughriders. And now you have the BC Lions at 4-5 on your heels, right? And the way that Nathan Rourke's playing and potentially that team gelling, right? We talked about how it was going to take 5 or 6 games probably for the BC Lions to figure things out under Buck Pierce as he implements his new systems and expectations and all these things. So there's a lot of pressure now around the blue and gold. And they just, for me, Huss, it's just, it is, while there are some areas in the defense, particularly the secondary, that should cause for concern for this team, especially after Terrell Bonds, as you mentioned, injury has now ruled him out for the rest of the year. He posted that on his own Instagram yesterday. It's the offense that's in a lot of trouble here. You look at that game, Huss. Yeah, that you're up 24-17 at halftime. You have a 7-point lead at halftime, and you lose by a single point in that game, which means you only scored 4 points. And 4 points were a record-tying 63-yard field goal by Sergio Castillo, which was amazing, which gave the Bombers the lead late in the game. And as you alluded to earlier, probably with a little bit of an ability to get a first down, you're probably icing that game away. The other point, Huss, was on the ensuing kickoff, which was a mistake. Which was a mistake, right? I mean, Sergio Castillo owned it yesterday. It's in Taylor's piece.
Too much juice in that leg after the bomb.
Yeah, and and he said he just tried to like, I forget exactly what the word was tap it. He tried to tap it. Yeah. And he even says, if you look at video of it, like, he doesn't riff through with his leg. His follow through isn't as fierce. He just caught it as clean as he could, much like he did in the 63-yarder. So that
leg is too much of a nuke.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you get the good with the bad, right? So, but it's just, to me, it's like, this team put up 4 points when they needed to when the trademark of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers is to shove it down teams' throats in the fourth quarter, to try to hold on desperately. And we can talk about the play calling here, right? We can talk about Jason Hogan, who seemed to be in the early running for OC of the year. No, that award doesn't actually exist. Because of his efforts against the BC Lions in back-to-back games. But since then, it's been very pedestrian. It's been questionable, right? You look at the call in the game before that against Toronto, where they got the interception in the end zone. I think there's a lot to be said here about the play calling, about And it's looking like the Matt Nichols led offense, where you rely, where those years where Nichols just relied so heavily on the playmaking ability of Andrew Harris, right, as that ditch off option, as that last option. And that's what you get when you see Brady Oliveira leading the team with 100 receiving yards, and the next closest receiver is Kevin Clercius at 32 receiving yards, right? Which means Nick Dembski had less. I think he had 28 yards or whatever it is. Like, this team needs more weapons on offense, and I think a lot of people and I'll put a little bit of a defense here for sure on Zach Collaros. In saying that, I do think he needs to be better. I think Zach would tell you first that he needs to be better, but the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and Kyle Walters and Mike O'Shea and management have dropped the ball majorly here in Winnipeg, to the point where they looked past Kenny Lawler. They didn't think they needed it. They thought that they could just get so much out of Zach Collaros. The reality is Zach's not getting better. He's not getting necessarily, sizably worse, but he needs help around him. He needs help on the O-line, right? Losing Jamarcus Hardrick a couple years ago, that's paying dividends, or not paying dividends. That's still screwing them over here. It's the receiver group. When Dalton Schoen is out, you don't have any stud receivers. Like, Nick Dembski's doing his best, and he's helping out. Like, he's certainly performing, but guys like Carrick Wheatfall need other targets to be open. Clearly, Carrick Wheatfall, he still has time. He's a young guy. He's in his mid-20s, but he's just not that number one receiver here. And I think when you look at the offense, the Bombers management was relying too heavily on aging players and not bringing in enough support. This is an offense-led driven league. You need to be putting your weapons there. And I think the defense, while they're having their issues, particularly giving up passing yards, are not in that game, last game particularly, allowed 12 points in the second half. They're doing their job. They're getting the kind of pressure. Could they do a better job? Yes, but it starts with the offense. And unless this offense can figure it out, this team is not going to do well. They're not going to get back to the Grey Cup. And I think that's where it needs to start here.
Well, just quickly, I mean, you mentioned, where the Bombers are lacking right now. Arguably, I think we can look back at the midway point of the season right now and say arguably the biggest loss of the entire offseason for the Bombers was Ted Gavaya. And I know everyone around the league wishing Ted well in his battle right now, health-wise. But I mean, people, I didn't not have this on my bingo card. People going, what about Wolodarski? Why isn't he around? I mean, there just is not that reliable out right now, with Nick Dembski getting the attention he is and the other guys not getting the separation for Zach to make things happen. But I'll say this. The offensive line hasn't been good enough. The receiving core is leaving a lot to be desired. The entire offense was Brady Oliveira. I mean, the fact that they had to do so many passes to Brady, listen, good to get the ball in his hands. He's your best player. But 9 targets, 9 catches for 100 yards, and then only 12 carries on the ground, 1 in the second half, is not the way that you want to build it up. And listen, for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers moving forward, there is going to be a lot more on Zach Collaros. And listen, we can say that he's capable of more, and he's being, kind of, his results are showing more of other parts of the offense. And I guess I'm here for that. But I'll also tell you that when you look at the Western Division right now, Vernon Adams has been better this year. Trevor Harris has been better this year. Nathan Rourke's been better this year. And Cody Fajardo in his last couple starts when he finally got in has been better. So the quarterback play hasn't been good enough. There are some factors in that as well. But here we are at 4-4 as opposed to their terrible start last year in the record. And I think you can make the argument that it's far more concerning about where the Bombers are right now at 500 than where they were last year at 2-6 at this point before they went on their run. Which brings us to the games this week. And by the way, we're going to get to our picks against the spread for our friends over at CoolBet. A quick note to all you cool bettors, especially in and around the Winnipeg area and Bomber fans. We are doing a contest with CoolBet to send a couple of you with us on the 1930 Crew Tour to Regina for the Labor Day Classic. So all you need to do is send a screen cap of any $10 bet at CoolBet along with your CoolBet username and your contact info. Email that to contest@winnipegsportstalk.com. And a week Friday on Winnipeg Sports Talk, we'll be doing a special marble race. Everyone that enters will get a spot in it, and we'll be giving away a trip for two valued at over $1,000. It'll include transport from Winnipeg to Regina, tickets to the game. We got a great hotel downtown. We got a dinner for you that's taken care of on Saturday night, swag bag, a whole bunch of stuff. If you do want to grab the last couple tickets, you can go to the 1930crew.com, count yourself in for sure. But if you are a cool better, or heck, go on to CoolBet, sign up, use the promo code WST for your first deposit. We'll give you a 100% bonus up to $200, and then send in that screen cap. Any $10 bet does not have to be CFL, to contest at winnipegsportstalk.com, and maybe you'll be rolling with us to Regina for Labor Day. Hammer, let's get to the lines for now. We did do a bit of a dry run yesterday. There's been a little bit of line movement, which has actually worked out quite well for the parlay.
Cat's out of the bag.
This opened up at 6. As expected, it's coming down a little bit. The Bombers are 5-point favorites against the Ottawa Redblacks to Blacks tomorrow in the opener on Thursday Night Football. And what looks to be, just quickly, for all the concern about the Bombers on the field, how about the performance of Blue Bomber fans? This is going to be a 10th straight sellout. There was like 5 singles left yesterday when we were looking at the Matrix. Certainly great things happening in Winnipeg off the field in a Grey Cup hosting year. But wow, such a huge game for Winnipeg coming off that loss to Calgary. You've got a decimated secondary, and you've got Dru Brown coming in red hot, protege versus the mentor, and two very desperate teams, Jeff. Listen, I've said this all year long. I think the Bombers, because of how good they've been for so long, get 2 or 3 reputation points every single week on the spread, or at least have so far this season. When you look at what is left of their defense and that secondary, and knowing what Ottawa's bringing to town, to me, when this opened at 6, I'm like, this is way, way too big of a line. I really do think this is going to probably be a very tight game, and the Winnipeg Blue Bomber offense, back to what we were just talking about, is going to have to step up, because Dru Brown and the Ottawa Redblacks offense, with what they're coming in with, are going to get theirs. This could be a really high-scoring game, but the Bomber offense is going to have to do their part. Where are you at on this one at 6, sitting at 5 right now in the favor of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers?
I'm conflicted here, Huss. I am. I mean, that point total for me is, as you mentioned, as we've been talking about, Winnipeg isn't exactly impressing anybody right now. Isn't exactly beating anybody in dramatic fashion or significant fashion. So by a 5-point spread, we're looking at probably a touchdown here, just under a touchdown, which is valuable, and certainly when it comes to betting. But I'm, call me a sucker for punishment. I'm kind of using my gut now at this point of the season. We're getting to the midway mark of the year. Teams are kind of starting to show themselves and whatnot. I think this is a win for the Bombers, and I don't feel comfortable about it. I don't feel confident. If I had to go 1 to 10, how my confident radar here, it'd be between probably a 3 and 4, because I do think Winnipeg has struggled. I do think Winnipeg has been, has played tight games. Right, a lot of games this year have been tight, or they've been blown out. So to start making the argument for Winnipeg to win by more than 5 points, 6 points or more, is, again, not a very confident one. However, I do think there's some important things here. Dru Brown returns back to Winnipeg, right? The Bombers know Dru Brown. Dru Brown became Dru Brown, CFLer here in Winnipeg. So the defense, those guys who have practiced against him, we know there's a lot of the similar members who were on this team from years ago on that unit, are going to have a bit of an advantage. Now, you can make the argument that he's got an advantage against them, certainly. But I do think, the way Willie Jefferson's playing, the way that front push is playing, I think they can get to Dru. I do think that this Bombers team is we talked about last week taking things personal, right? I even said I think they're going to take things personal against last week. But I also said that they weren't necessarily going to win. They're going to keep it close. I think this is extra personal. I'm not buying into Ottawa's hype, as I mentioned before. I don't think that they're a very convincing team. I think they relied too much on Dru Brown, even though they did work in their run game last week. to effect. I think Winnipeg is going to be fed up. They're going to be at home. And if you think Winnipeg is going to win this game, I don't think it's going to be as close. I am going to take Winnipeg again. Even as I say it out loud, Huss, I feel less and less confident, but I'm going to take Winnipeg in this one.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm just sort of living in the moment right now, and I can't be confident that the Winnipeg Blue Bombers defensively, and particularly at secondary, are going to be able to shut down Dru Brown, which means there's going to be a lot on Zach Collaros and this Bomber offense to step up and be much better. And I certainly think that they can do that. But that being said, I mean, for them to be covering 5 or 6 points, I think is a tall ask. You ask anyone, and they need to find a way to be 1 point better and make sure that they're putting up a notch in the win column right now. And, with the struggles that they're having throwing the football, listen, I do think this could be a massive Brady Oliveira game, and it better be if the Bombers are going to win. But I just can't get over the fact that this secondary got torched to the level that it did last week. You're now taking Bonds out. I mean, we're going to get a depth chart at some point this week. We'll be talking about it extensively today on Winnipeg Sports Talk at 1 p.m. Central, as well as Thursday heading into the game. It is a tall ask. And listen, I think the smart money is on Ottawa +5. I think we're going to have a close game, and just hopefully the veteran moxie, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, will find a way to win a football game. But anybody that's watched this Bomber offense operate lately, pretty tough to expect them to win by a margin against a team that's coming in, at least offensively, primed to continue rolling the way they did last week against the Toronto Argonauts. Speaking of those Toronto Argonauts, Argos and Elks, in what feels like a quintessential loser leaves town game, Hammer. All that talk about the season doesn't start until Labor Day. Well, that's fine unless you start off with 1 or 2 wins in the first half of the season. And one of these two teams is going to be sitting at 2 wins as we get very close to Labor Day on this one. This was 1.5 yesterday. It's now moved to 3. And it does seem like there's a lot of steam behind the Elks and Cody Fajardo. I guess when I look at this game, I still think that the Argos, I can't believe the Argos have lost some of the games that they have this year. I mean, you can go down and look at least 3 games that the Argos absolutely should have won, including last week. And yet here they are with 2 wins on the season. I love the way you brought up the last time Dinwiddie challenged his team and really aired them out publicly. They came back and won. I think there is going to be, listen, straight up facts. This is the CFL. There's going to be a lot of guys playing for jobs this week that are in the lineup right now. And as great as the Cody Fajardo story has been, listen, Nick Arbuckle and that offense have been putting up some numbers, and the Edmonton defense is still very, very spotty and questionable. Montreal just didn't have the horses in with Davis Alexander's out to really expose them. So, listen, I was feeling okay taking the Argos in a tight one at 1.5. Feel much better getting the 3 about it right now. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't be surprised if the Argos go in and just win this game outright. And maybe it's a little bit of a wake-up call for our friends in Edmonton. That being said, should be a close game. Neither of these teams are particularly good, but I'm going to take the points with the Argos on the road.
Yeah, Huss, as you mentioned, we like them at +1.5 yesterday, right? I mean, to have an extra 1.5 added to that, I think it is an obvious one for me. I think it comes down to 2 things, right? And how you feel this game's going to go. Like, do you believe in Edmonton's momentum, right? They had a close game against Hamilton before that. They had, they obviously had a good game.
What are we saying if MBT doesn't throw up all over himself and turn that?
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I'm kind of getting to. And like the same story in Toronto. I think they're better than their record. This, to me, comes down to Dinwiddie calling out his players, right? Expecting better from them, but also expecting better from himself, right? Ryan Dinwiddie is a great coach. This is what I'm going with. I think he's going to have them prepared. I think you get this line because there's a little bit of hype around the Elks. I just think Ryan Dinwiddie's a better coach than Mark Killam. So as far as I'm concerned, I think that I would have probably taken the Argos if it was the other way, if it was -3, to be honest with you. I think there's obviously something that to say about playing at home, but it's not like Toronto's going into Winnipeg or having to go into Saskatchewan or having to go into Hamilton. Like, Commonwealth Stadium hasn't exactly been an intimidating place to play. So I think Toronto does well out there. I think Arbuckle, as we mentioned before, hasn't been the issue, right? You want Chad Kelly in your lineup, but it hasn't been quarterback play. So I think this is, it's not a blowout, but I do think it's a tight game. And for that reason, I'm all over the Argos on +3. And I do think that they win the game.
That'll be the Friday night football game on TSN Toronto at Edmonton. Unfortunate scheduling, because if the early game on Saturday could have been the Friday night game, I think we might set another viewership record on TSN, coming off a great weekend for eyeballs on the Canadian Football League game last week. Hamilton, first place in the East, taking on the first place Rough Riders at Mosaic Stadium Saturday afternoon. Saskatchewan is a 3.5-point favorite. Important to note, the Riders coming off of a bye, Jeff. And listen, Hamilton is really good. Bo Levi Mitchell right now, we'll get to these numbers in a little bit, is the favorite for the MOP. But I do buy into the Rough Riders right now as the best team in the Canadian Football League. And listen, as a Bomber guy, I hope that changes in the second half of the season, but credit where credit is deserved. They are the number one team on the power poll. They deserve it. They're coming off the bye week. I think Corey Mace has this team believing in themselves. And the bottom line is they're putting out quality players, quality play on both sides of the football. Their defense is legit. It will be a huge test for Bo Levi and the Ticats to continue rolling the way they have been. And I think Trevor Harris is quietly, amongst great performances from VA and Rourke and BLM, is quietly reminding people that he is more than capable of leading a quality team to wins consistently. And to be honest, I think this line is off a little bit, in that if these two teams were playing on a neutral field, I'd still like Saskatchewan by a field goal or so. They certainly deserve 3 points for the home field advantage, which is usually baked in by the bookies. So to me, this is off a little bit. And Saskatchewan at 3.5, I think is a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity for Saskatchewan to truly plant their flag as the team to beat in the Canadian Football League. I think they're going to be real tough to beat. I think there's a real resurgence in Rider Nation right now. I'm hoping for another great or full crowd at Mosaic Stadium. I think this could be a long day for the Ticats. I'm hoping for a close, exciting game, and we probably should get something like that. But to me, Saskatchewan -3.5, I didn't have to think too long to believe in the Riders and lay the points at home in this situation, especially with the extra week to prepare after the Ticats just went to OT a week ago against the BC Lions.
I think I agree with you. Like, at first blush, the line seems off a little bit, right? I mean, maybe a 5-point, 6-point in favor of Saskatchewan, but we are talking about the two best teams in the league, arguably, right? We're talking the two top. So I do understand the close margin. I especially understand the close margin when you consider there's kind of two trends coming from these teams, right? I mean, Saskatchewan, put the boots on Montreal in their last game, but prior to that, they were susceptible to playing down to their competition. They would get up to a lead, they'd have a healthy lead. Brett Lothar would forget how to kick field goals, and then they would, kind of become a one-score game, a close game. They'd still get the victory. Obviously, they have 7 wins and 1 loss, but it became a much closer game. And when you look over at Hamilton, what have they been doing? Right? Like, even like we talked about in their loss against BC, like this is a team that games prior to, and like a lot of the season, would come back in the fourth quarter, would rely on Bo Levi Mitchell tossing the rock and then staring up at the crowd, either his own or the visiting, and been like, there's no doubt, right? When everybody was doubting the chance of coming back in that fourth quarter. So you have a team who has consistently come back in games, and you've had another team in Saskatchewan Roughriders who's consistently allowed teams to come back, and that all of a sudden that 3.5 points seems pretty down, pretty bang on. So that being said, you mentioned, coming off the bye week, I do think, I'm not saying there's too much hype in Hamilton, but again, I think there's been some squeezed out wins there that if things, go wrong, one player or here or there goes wrong, we're maybe not talking as highly about them. That being said, good teams win close games. So you can't really take that away from them either. I am going with Saskatchewan. I'm taking the coming off the bye week, the preparation, being able to study the Hamilton Ticats for much longer than they've been able to study the Riders. And I think that we are looking at a game that finishes in favor of Saskatchewan 4 points or more. I don't think it's a big ask. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if Hamilton made it close. But this one, given the momentum, given what this team's been building to, understanding that 7-1, while an impressive record, there's still a lot of season to play and a lot of things can happen. So I don't think they're overconfident in Riderville. And for those reasons, I do think that they put the boots on Hamilton. I think they send a message to the rest of the league that they are the best team in the league, and they're not slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it often y'all just simplify things. You take out the 3 points for home field and ask yourself, if Hamilton and Saskatchewan right now were playing on a neutral field, who do you like? I like Saskatchewan, and they'd be a half-point favorite, with this baked in. So we're going to both ride with the Riders at home -3.5. The final game, and to me, I think this one was the simplest pick for me, at least, in the week, is the Montreal Alouettes. We talked about the quarterback situation, likely going to get third stringer Caleb Evans going at it. Long trip across the country to the BC Lions, who, we've talked a lot about momentum right now. I think they get a ton of it from the way that they pull themselves off the mat and beat the Ticats last week in a game that they absolutely had to have. Nathan Rourke is playing incredible football right now. It seems like Buck Pierce is more comfortable with his team. And I just think this is a tough spot for Jason Moss and the Montreal Alouettes without the horses on offense. Some injuries, in particular at the quarterback position, to hang with the BC Lions. Now, this one opened at 4.5. It was 5 earlier today. I see it's back at 4.5. I think this one, by the time we get to game time, is probably closer to a touchdown. So jumping on it at 4.5 early on in the week was, for me personally, the easiest pick of the week. I think they win this one running away. And I think at the end of this game, when we're talking next week, and we'll get to this in a minute, we're talking more and more about Nathan Rourke leading the Lions back. And that's why the Winnipeg Blue Bombers got to have this one, because despite having the advantage of BC with the 2-game sweep in the first 3 weeks of the season, BC is right there with them now, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. I like the BC Lions big over Montreal, comfortably covering the 4.5 or 5 points.
Yeah, you know what? When your offense can't stay on the field, doesn't matter how talented you are. You're going to get torched, right? And we're seeing that happening in Montreal, particularly around their offense, particularly around their quarterback situation. So are we expecting Caleb Evans to come in this week and be on the road and beat a BC Lions team that plays well at home, that's been building momentum, that, as you mentioned, has Nathan Rourke playing the way that he's been playing? I don't think so. So this idea that, if you're expecting to win by a field goal, what's another 2 points, right? I mean, this to me is a pretty obvious one. I do think, Montreal's reeling a little bit here. As I mentioned, Caleb Evans I do think he's obviously got talent, right? Because he's not old. He's still in his 20s. He's a guy who has been able to stick around in the league. He does bring an element of mobility that Mikhail Bethel-Thompson doesn't have. So I guess there's that part to it. I see even if Montreal has a hot start, and I think I'm envisioning Montreal kind of executing early on in this game, because they're going to set him up to succeed in his first drive. And if they can do that, great. If they can, I think it's even worse. So I do think Nathan Rourke has a big game. I think this is an opportunity for, look, BC's still 4-5. They're desperate, right? Like, they're a super desperate team. They know the uphill battle they have if they want to host a home playoff game. It's not just Calgary and Saskatchewan they need to worry about. They need to worry about Winnipeg as well. And Buck Pierce knows that. So I think they play a responsible game. I think they play a good game. I think they take a healthy lead into the fourth quarter. And I think we see, much like we used to see with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, the Lions, kind of own the line of scrimmage down the stretch and ice off this game, certainly more than 4 points. So I'm going with the BC Lions all day to beat Montreal.
All right. Now, we're going to get to Grey Cup odds in a minute, but we did put together our CFL 110 parlay with our friends over at CoolBet. Now, again, we cooked this up together yesterday, so the lines are a little different than where they are right now. We're on the Argos but a shorter number, +1.5, which has boosted the value of this parlay. We've also got the Riders at -3.5 and the BC Lions at -4.5. This comes out if you just do it manually to +673. Our pals Jake and Pat and the Cool Bet boys have given us a nice boost to +789. It was actually as high as just over 8-1 last night. But it's still actually more than it was when we first put it together, specifically because of that line movement in the Toronto game, Edmonton game, from 1.5 to 3. So if you like Toronto to win or lose by 1, Sask to cover 3.5, and BC to cover 4.5. Ride with us. It's in the combo cards right at the top of coolbet.com at just about 8-1 right now as we do this live Wednesday morning at +789. Speaking of those odds, Hammer, just before we're done, a quick look at the futures right now in the Canadian Football League. And no surprise, the Saskatchewan Roughriders, as we mentioned, the number 1 team in the league, are the favorites to win the Grey Cup. +275 is the number for Saskatchewan. Calgary next at +350. And then the Montreal Alouettes and Hamilton Tiger Cats tied at +375. A big gap before you get to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at +950. And then the BC Lions at 14-1. Argos 16-1. Ottawa 40-1. And the Edmonton Elks 80-1. But for the first time in a while, we've got some odds which will be up until kickoff on Thursday for the most outstanding player. And I want to hit you with some of these numbers. Bo Levi Mitchell, the favorite, +135. Vernon Adams, +225. Let's not forget in our future show, VA came into the season as 25-1 to win the MOP. He's now the second shortest favorite at +225. Trevor Harris is at +350. And then there's a gap. Nathan Rourke, 11-1, and then another huge gap, and you get Kenny Lawler at 45, Brady Oliveira, 50, Caleros, Coxey, 55, Davis Alexander, and Dru Brown at 60-1. The one number on the listen, I totally get why Bo, Vernon Adams, and Trevor Harris are the top 3 numbers, but I have to admit, if you're looking for a value play right now, Nathan Rourke at 11-1, I think, is very tantalizing in that we're seeing how good he's looked lately. That offense, I think, is coming around with McSimic and, of course, Buck Pierce. They have played many of the hardest games. I mean, they've played Saskatchewan twice. They played Winnipeg twice so far this year. I really think that the projections for BC in the second half of the year are going to be very good. And if Nathan Rourke is able to put this team on his back and get them right into the mix with Calgary and Saskatchewan, I think a lot of people will be looking at Rourke for that potential MOP vote. So when you consider he's at 11-1 right now, and those other 3 favorites are far shorter numbers, I don't mind a little sprinkle on Nathan Rourke right now at 11-1 to potentially barge right into the middle of the MOP race in the second half of the season.
Oh, you're leaving me the scraps there, Huss, on the odds here. I think you're right. I do think that Nathan Rourke would be the guy that you would pick up in that combination. I don't see worth it any other guy, right? I mean, even to your point, I think you got Adams at that. You know, he's still in that race, but even like the odds now, like I don't like that at all for him, right? Like he's and if you look at Nathan Rourke, you do have the opportunity to, like, if he's going to get the BC Lions to where they need to get, including a playoff spot, notably a home playoff spot, then he's going to have to throw the lights out, right? Like, I mean, they have James Butler, but he's going to be the Nathan Rourke that we know he is. And so his stock is only going to rise here. Like BC's, he got injured early on. There was the back-to-back losses to Winnipeg. So now it's like, you know, you kind of, you know, he needs to kind of step up, and you know, the kind of player he is. Anyone that's watched his interviews, anyone that's seen him play, he wants that, right? He wants that pressure. He wants that, you know, something that he needs to get, you know, like he wants to have it on his back. So I think at this point, what did the odds open at? I wonder with Nathan Rourke, because they wouldn't have been.
Oh, it was shorter. It was shorter than 11-1.
He might have been one of the favorites, if not the favorite. I think if you get him now, you're good.
At 5 or 6. The one thing I'll say, Trevor Harris at +350. I mean, if you believe that Saskatchewan is the best team, they will finish as the number 1 team.
There's that
they
bias
win
that
the West.
You get the quarterback, the best player of the best team in the league.
Definitely. And listen, I think we'd be talking much more about Trevor Harris If Bo hadn't had the start that he's had after the season that he had last year, and of course, Vernon Adams being a guy that sort of dragged Calgary from the longest shot to win the Grey Cup right into the middle of things. As Trevor Harris is passing it over 70% right now. They're winning football games. I mean, to me, if it wasn't Rourke, I think Rourke the value play just because we're getting 11-1 on it. But I think there's probably that Trevor Harris number, put it this way, as long as Saskatchewan keeps winning and playing well, isn't going the other way. So you can think about that as well. All those numbers.
Part of that though, Huss, is that you have a guy in Trevor Harris and a guy in Bo Levi Mitchell who both have injury histories, recent injury history. So they've kind of dodged that bullet, right? Trevor Harris hasn't, right? He's missed some time already, but there is potential for these guys. If these guys get hurt in the next few weeks, they're not winning it, right? Like it's not enough. None of them have been the Nathan Rourke of 2022, where you're almost kind of like, he's played 10 games only, but he might be, none of those players have done enough to be in that situation.
It's funny you bring that up too, because there is something to say about timing of those injuries as well. And the fact that Nathan Rourke missed a couple games at the start of the year, those will be long since forgotten by the time people are voting. Even if the Riders get into a situation where they can rest him for a couple games if they need to, that could play into it. But anyways, we haven't had CFL MOP odds up for a while. They're up right now at CoolBet. You can go and check those on. And again, if you do want to ride with us to Regina for the Labor Day Classic, if you're in the Winnipeg area, send in any $10 bet from CoolBet, your user ID, as well as your contact info so we can get at you. Contest at winnipegsportstalk.com, and we'll be giving that away a week Friday on our Friday edition of Winnipeg Sports Talk. Hammer, man, the bar was set pretty high for the CFL last week. I'm not sure whether we'll get 4 classics like we did last one, but tell you what, I can't wait for it. And it all starts at Princess Auto Stadium. Another sold-out crowd, Ottawa, Winnipeg, to kick things off tomorrow night. And then great rest of the slate. Always fun chopping it up with you. We'll do it a little earlier next week. We'll probably have this show up on Tuesday next week. So join us then. And if you want more Hammer, pop on tomorrow. He'll be joining me on Winnipeg Sports Talk to tee up tomorrow's Bomber game as the Bombers look to get back into the win column against the Ottawa Redblacks, who are looking for 3 in a row. For Jeff Hamilton, I'm Andrew Patterson. Connor Rabchak behind the scenes here at Winnipeg Sports Talk, getting us on and off the air. Shout out to everyone that joined us in chat as well. Great to see everyone here for a special live edition in the morning. We might do this a little bit more as we get into the rest of the regular season. But in the meantime, enjoy the games this weekend. And make sure for more great CFL talk, join us daily, 1 p.m. Central, Monday to Friday, right here on Winnipeg Sports Talk. Thanks again to Connor. Thanks to CoolBet and everyone that joined us for this week's CFL 110. We'll catch you next week right here on Winnipeg Sports Talk.